November 1881 arrived early in the Wind River Range of the Wyoming Territory. The mountains darkened sooner than usual, and the first snow did not drift lightly or melt away by noon. It came down heavy and wet, clinging to trees, rooftops, and the ground itself. Old-timers along the Popo Agie River knew what that meant. Winter had decided not to wait. By mid-October, the homesteaders were already working harder than usual. Axes rang through the cold air from dawn to dusk. Men split wood until their shoulders burned and their hands cracked from the dry wind. Everyone understood the same rule: if you wanted to survive a Wyoming winter, you needed at least 4 cords of firewood. 5 was safer. 6, if the winter turned cruel, firewood was not just comfort. It was survival. It meant warmth, cooked food, unfrozen water, and a chance to sleep through the night. Without it, a family did not last long. Yet there was a problem no one liked to talk about openly. A problem that ruined even the best preparation. Wet firewood. You could cut good timber. You could split it clean and stack it neatly. You could cover it with tarps, canvas, or scraps of tin. But none of that mattered once Wyoming's weather took control. Rain soaked the piles. Snow melted during warm afternoons. Chinook winds brought sudden thaws, and nights froze everything solid again. Wood absorbed moisture slowly and quietly, until it was too late. Wet wood does not burn the way it should. Instead of flame, it produces smoke. Instead of heat, it steals warmth to boil off the water trapped inside. Fires hiss and sputter. Chimneys clog with creosote. Rooms fill with smoke that stings the eyes and lungs. Most people accepted this as part of mountain life. Winter was harsh. That was simply how it was, but one man did not accept it. His name was Everett Ashford. Everett was not famous, and he did not come from money. He was a carpenter from Pennsylvania who had come west in 1878 with his wife, Margaret, and their 2 young sons. Like many others, he was drawn by land, opportunity, and the promise of a better life. He built a solid cabin on a rise above the river, with a stone fireplace and tight chinking between the logs. By frontier standards, it was a good home. Still, every winter brought the same struggle. Everett stored his firewood the same way everyone else did. On the north side of the cabin, under a slanted lean-to roof. He covered it with tarps and weighted them down with rocks. It worked when the weather stayed dry. But Wyoming rarely stayed dry for long. Each winter morning, Everett found himself prying frozen logs apart with a splitting maul. Many pieces were soaked through. Some were frozen together so tightly they might as well have been one solid block. Even when he got a fire started, it burned poorly. Smoke filled the cabin. The chimney clogged. Margaret coughed. The boy's eyes watered. Everett noticed something others ignored. Wet wood did not just burn worse, it burned faster and colder. He was using nearly twice as much wood to get half the heat. The math was simple and brutal. If something didn't change, winter would always be a losing fight. In the summer of 1881, Everett made a decision that surprised everyone around him. He decided to dig beneath his house, not beside it. Not behind it, under it. When neighbors first saw him marking the ground with stakes and string, they thought he was planning a root cellar. That was common enough. But when they realized where the digging would happen, the laughter started. "You're going to dig under your own house?" one neighbor asked. Everett stayed calm. "Not under the foundation," he explained. "Offset from it. The supports won't be touched." That didn't reassure anyone. Water was the enemy of every frontier home. A bad foundation meant cracked walls, sagging roofs, and eventually collapse. Men had lost homes for far less risky mistakes. Everett's neighbors warned him again and again that he was courting disaster. Margaret did not argue, but she worried. She had watched her husband fix the chimney when it cracked. She had watched him rebuild parts of the cabin by lantern light. She trusted his hands, even if she feared the risk. Everett dug carefully. He chose a spot where the ground naturally sloped away from the cabin. He went down 5 feet beneath the floor, making sure the chamber stayed clear of the foundation stones. He hauled out clay and rock bucket by bucket, shoring up the sides with split logs as he worked. The chamber he built was not large, but it was deliberate. 8 feet wide, 12 feet long, 6 feet high at the center. Enough space to hold several cords of split wood. The floor was not dirt. Everett laid down a thick bed of coarse gravel over compacted clay. Water would never pool there. If moisture entered, gravity would take it away. The walls were half stone, half timber, packed tight with clay. He left small gaps near the top for air to move through, but not wide enough for snow or rain to enter. Ventilation without exposure. Then came the most unusual part. Everett cut a trapdoor into the kitchen floor. It was framed strong, sealed tight, and insulated with scraps of fabric and wood. When closed, it disappeared into the floor. When open, it revealed a ladder leading down into the chamber. On the downhill side of the house, Everett dug a narrow tunnel that opened outside several feet away. This was how he would load firewood in autumn without carrying it through the house. A low wooden door sealed the entrance. By September, the work was done. The valley watched and waited. Many expected the first storm to flood the chamber or collapse the ground beneath the cabin. Men shook their heads at the trading post. Women whispered their concern for Margaret. The general opinion was clear. Everett Ashford had made a dangerous mistake. Winter arrived in stages. Early snow gave way to brutal cold. Then came thawing winds that turned everything wet. Then deep freezes that locked moisture inside the woodpiles across the valley. By December, the difference became obvious. Jacob Pute, one of Everett's closest neighbors, spent hours each morning breaking frozen wood apart. His fires burned smoky and weak. Daniel Calhoun, an experienced builder, fared slightly better but still burned through wood at twice his usual rate. Then came January. A massive storm buried the valley under 3 feet of snow. Drifts rose higher than cabin windows. Winds tore tarps from wood piles and scattered kindling across the fields. When the storm finally broke, temperatures plunged far below zero. Families burned fence rails. Some burned furniture. Anything that would catch fire went into the hearth. Everett opened the trapdoor in his kitchen. The air below was dry and steady. The wood was warm enough to handle with bare hands. He carried up an armload of split pine and lit the stove with one match. The fire burned clean and strong. It lasted all night. Margaret said nothing. She simply stood near the stove, warming her hands, watching the flames. By February, word spread. A traveling surveyor recorded temperatures inside several cabins. Everett's home was nearly 10 degrees warmer than others, using far less wood. His chimney stayed clean. His family stayed healthy. When spring melt came, the test everyone feared finally arrived. Snow turned to water. The ground softened. Streams swelled. Everett's underground chamber stayed dry. The gravel drained moisture away. The slope carried it downhill. The foundation held firm. Daniel Calhoun visited and looked inside. After a long silence, he spoke the words Everett had waited months to hear, "I'll be damned." By summer, men came asking questions. By fall, others began digging. Everett Ashford did not invent underground storage. But he applied it with care, courage, and understanding. In doing so, he changed how an entire valley faced winter. Sometimes survival isn't about enduring hardship, sometimes it's about refusing to accept it. Spring did not arrive all at once in the Wind River Valley. It came slowly, cautiously, as if testing whether winter had truly loosened its grip. Snow lingered in shaded places long after the sun returned. The river ran high and cold, swollen with meltwater from the mountains. Mud swallowed boots whole, and wagon wheels groaned as they dragged through softened ground. For most families, spring brought relief mixed with exhaustion. They had survived the winter, but just barely. Wood piles were nearly gone. Fences had gaps where rails had been burned. Furniture showed scars from desperate nights. Smoke damaged blackened ceilings, and chimneys needed rebuilding after months of creosote buildup. At the Ashford cabin, spring felt different. Everett still had firewood, not scraps. Not half-rotten leftovers. He had solid, dry splits stacked neatly underground, just as they had been in January. Margaret noticed the difference immediately. The house smelled clean. The walls were not stained with smoke. The boys had not spent the winter coughing. For the first time since they had come west, winter had not felt like a constant emergency. Word spread quietly at first. Men noticed Everett was not hauling logs from the forest in late March the way others were. They saw smoke rise steady and clean from his chimney. They felt the warmth when they stepped inside. Curiosity replaced mockery. One morning in early April, Jacob Pute walked over with his hat in his hands. He did not joke. He did not tease. He simply asked, "Can I see how you built that tunnel?" Everett nodded and showed him. They stood at the downhill entrance, where the ground sloped gently away from the cabin. Everett explained how he angled the opening so drifting snow would pass over it instead of piling up. He pointed out the low door, how it sealed tight, how animals stayed out. Jacob listened carefully. He asked questions. He took mental notes. Within weeks, Jacob began digging his own chamber. Others followed. Not everyone copied Everett exactly. Some men built smaller storage spaces. Some chose external root cellar-style sheds close to their homes instead of digging beneath them. But they all copied the same principles: drainage, ventilation, stable temperature, and protection from weather. Daniel Calhoun resisted longer than most. Calhoun had built half the cabins in the valley. His word carried weight. Admitting Everett was right meant admitting he had been wrong. That was not easy for a man who had survived decades on experience and reputation, but facts do not care about pride. By fall of 1882, Daniel came to Everett quietly. He asked about foundation offsets, about gravel depth, about ventilation size. Everett answered without triumph. He explained what worked and what he would change if he did it again. That winter, Daniel Calhoun stored his firewood underground. He never publicly apologized, but he never mocked the idea again. The winter of 1882–83 was not as brutal as the one before, but it was still hard. Snow came early again. Freeze-thaw cycles returned. But something had changed in the valley. More families had dry wood, more homes stayed warm, less smoke filled the air. People began to notice patterns. Homes with dry firewood burned less fuel. Chimneys stayed cleaner. Illnesses dropped. Children slept better. Women spent less time fighting weak fires and more time doing work that mattered. By the mid-1880s, the idea had spread beyond the Popo-Agie River. Homesteaders traveling through the region took note. Some copied the design exactly. Others adapted it to their land. In Montana, men built hillside firewood cellars dug straight into slopes. In Colorado, some combined firewood storage with food cellars, separating the spaces with stone walls to control moisture. In higher elevations, ventilation ports were adjusted to reduce condensation. No one called it the Ashford method, but everyone knew where it started. Everett never sought attention. He did not lecture. He did not claim credit. When asked, he simply said, "Drywood burns better." As the years passed, the underground chamber became just another part of the Ashford home. The boys grew older. They learned to split wood and stack it underground. They learned how to judge moisture by weight and sound. They learned that preparation mattered more than strength. Margaret noticed something else. Winter no longer felt like something to endure with fear. It became a season with rhythm. Fires burned steady. Meals cooked without rush. Evenings felt calmer. That calm mattered. Frontier life wore people down not just physically, but mentally. Constant cold, constant labor, constant uncertainty drained families. Anything that reduced stress increased survival. By the 1890s, underground firewood storage was no longer unusual in high-elevation regions. Some county records even mentioned below-grade fuel storage as a feature in homestead descriptions. It had become normal, yet outside those regions, the idea remained rare. In lower elevations, dry winters made it unnecessary. In towns, coal replaced wood. Progress moved on, but the principle remained timeless: keep fuel dry. Control moisture. Work with the land instead of fighting it. Everett lived to old age. He never left Wyoming. When asked late in life why he took the risk, he answered simply, "I was tired of wasting effort." That was the truth of it. Most frontier suffering came not from lack of work, but from wasted work. Wet firewood wasted labor. Smoke wasted health. Inefficiency wasted lives. Everett Ashford did not change the world. He changed his winter, and that was enough. Even today, if you walk the old homestead lands carefully, you can still find signs. Shallow depressions where cellars once stood. Stone walls half buried by time. Gravel patches where nothing grows because drainage still works after more than a century. They are quiet reminders. Survival is not always about strength. Sometimes it is about noticing what others ignore and having the courage to build anyway. By the time the 1890s arrived, Everett Ashford's underground firewood chamber was no longer considered strange in the Wind River Valley. It had become something else entirely. Ordinary. Practical. Sensible. People stopped talking about it as that crazy hole under Ashford's house, and began referring to it simply as good storage. That shift did not happen overnight. It took years of winters, years of comparison, and years of quiet observation. But once people saw the results repeat themselves again and again, doubt faded. Cold winters came and went, and each time, the families with dry firewood fared better. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just steadily. That steadiness mattered more than people realized at the time. Frontier life was never about single dramatic moments. It was about surviving thousands of ordinary days without making a fatal mistake. A bad winter did not always kill people outright. More often, it weakened them. Smoke damaged lungs. Cold weakened bodies. Exhaustion dulled judgment. And once a family slipped behind, it was hard to recover. Dry firewood changed that balance. Everett's system did not eliminate winter hardship, but it removed one constant source of struggle. Fires burned when they were supposed to. Heat stayed in the house instead of disappearing up the chimney as steam. Less wood meant fewer dangerous trips into the forest during storms. Less smoke meant fewer sick children and fewer lingering coughs that turned into pneumonia. These were not small things. Everett never wrote a manual. He never claimed ownership of the idea. When people asked him why he chose to build underground instead of improving surface storage, his answer was always simple: the weather can't reach what it can't touch. That sentence stayed with people. As homesteaders moved farther west and north, they carried the idea with them. In Montana, men dug firewood chambers directly into hillsides, carving storage rooms into firm earth and lining them with stone. In Idaho, some built half-buried sheds backed into slopes, using earth on three sides to block wind and moisture. In Colorado's high country, underground firewood storage became common for mining camps and isolated cabins. The design changed based on land, tools, and skill. But the principles stayed the same. Drainage came first. Ventilation came second. Protection from surface weather mattered more than thick walls. Everett watched this spread with quiet satisfaction. He did not travel far. His world remained mostly within the valley. But visitors came through, asked questions, and carried answers elsewhere. At home, life settled into a rhythm. The boys grew taller and stronger. They learned how to split wood properly, how to stack it with space for air, and how to judge dryness by sound. Everett taught them to strike two pieces together and listen. Dry wood rang sharp. Damp wood sounded dull. Margaret noticed something else. Winter evenings felt different now. They were not rushed. Fires did not need constant tending. Meals cooked evenly. The cabin stayed warm enough that people could sit apart from the stove instead of crowding around it. That space changed how the family lived. Margaret took up sewing again during winter, something she had abandoned when fires burned too weak to keep her hands warm. The boys read by firelight without shivering. Everett repaired tools indoors instead of waiting for warmer days. Winter stopped being an enemy and became a season. This shift was subtle but powerful. People underestimate how much constant cold shapes behavior. When warmth is uncertain, everything becomes urgent. When warmth is reliable, thinking expands. Planning improves. Mistakes decrease. Everett's neighbors began noticing these differences too. Homes with dry firewood stayed cleaner. Ceilings were not blackened with soot. Chimneys lasted longer without repair. People spent less money and time fixing damage caused by smoke and creosote. Doctors were rare on the frontier, but sickness was not. Respiratory illness claimed many lives quietly. Children and older adults suffered most. Dry burning fires reduced smoke inhalation significantly, even though no one measured it at the time. People simply noticed fewer coughs that lingered through spring. Women noticed first. They were the ones tending fires during the day. They saw the difference between fighting damp wood and feeding a clean flame. They talked to each other while trading eggs, sewing supplies, and stories. Word spread faster among kitchens than it ever did at trading posts. By the early 1900s, underground storage of some kind was common practice in high-elevation settlements. It rarely appeared in books or official records. It didn't need to. It passed from hand to hand, from neighbor to neighbor. Quiet knowledge. Everett aged slowly. His hair grayed. His hands stiffened. But he never stopped maintaining the chamber. Each summer, he checked drainage paths. He cleared debris from the downhill ditch. He inspected ventilation gaps and repaired them if animals tried to block them. He treated the underground space like part of the house, not an experiment. That attitude was key. Many frontier failures came from neglect, not bad ideas. Everett understood that systems only work if you care for them. A blocked drain could ruin everything. A broken vent could trap moisture. He never assumed the earth would forgive laziness. As years passed, his sons left to build homes of their own. Each built some form of protected firewood storage. Not all were underground, but all followed the same principles their father had taught them. Everett lived long enough to see towns grow, railroads arrive, and coal replace wood in some places. He watched technology change daily life. But he never dismissed his old solution. Coal gets wet too, he once said with a smile. When Everett died, the chamber remained. Margaret continued using it for years. Later occupants adapted it for food storage and tools. Eventually, time reclaimed it. Wood rotted. Walls collapsed. Earth settled, but not completely. Even decades later, nothing grew easily where the gravel bed lay buried. Drainage still worked. Water still passed through the soil differently there. The land remembered today. If you walk carefully across old homestead land, you can sometimes find these traces. Slight dips in the ground. Unnatural stone placements. Patches where snow melts faster or slower than the surrounding earth. They are not monuments, they are footprints. Everett Ashford never set out to change how people built homes. He set out to keep his firewood dry. That choice reshaped his winters, his family's health, and eventually, an entire region's approach to survival. The deeper lesson is not about underground storage. It is about attention. Everett noticed what others ignored. He questioned what everyone accepted. He understood that suffering was not always unavoidable. Sometimes it was the result of habits repeated without thought. He did not argue with critics. He did not defend himself loudly. He built quietly, tested carefully, and waited for winter to speak. Winter always tells the truth. That lesson applies far beyond firewood. Whether in 1881 or today, survival depends less on strength and more on understanding systems. Heat, water, airflow, and shelter do not care about opinion. They follow rules. People who learn those rules live better. Everett Ashford's underground chamber was not heroic. It was not dramatic. It did not require rare tools or special knowledge. It required patience, humility, and respect for the land. That is why it worked, and that is why it still matters.